Everyone thinks I'm this sweet little sister, but they didn't see me sneaking into the mudroom at 2 a.m. to dismantle my brother's life one cricket at a time. The sound of my brother's footsteps used to be the soundtrack of my nightmares. Heavy, rhythmic thuds that made the floorboards in the hallway groan, a warning that the storm was coming. At 15, Jaxson wasn't just a teenager. He was a force of nature. 6'2", 250 pounds of muscle, testosterone, and pure, unadulterated malice. To the town, he was the star defensive tackle, the golden child, who was going to put our tiny zip code on the map. To me, he was a monster who lived in the room next door. I can still feel the phantom sting on the back of my neck from his playful slaps. I can still hear the way he'd mock my voice, turning my words into a high-pitched whine until I didn't want to speak at all. It wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was psychological warfare. He didn't just want to tease me. He wanted to consume every ounce of space I occupied. My parents were the worst kind of enablers. He does it because he loves you, Maya, my mother would say, not looking up from her wine glass as Jaxson held me in a headlock until my vision blurred. It's just how boys are, my father would chime in, his eyes glowing with pride whenever he looked at Jackson's football trophies. He was the firstborn. He was the son. In their eyes, he could do no wrong, and I was just the supporting character in his epic coming-of-age story. But even the most resilient bridge has a weight limit. Mine snapped over a box of leftover chicken piccata. It sounds petty, I know. But when you have nothing of your own, when your clothes are hand-me-downs and your voice is constantly silenced, that one thing you're looking forward to becomes your entire world. I had saved my allowance for weeks to go to that Italian place with my best friend. I had half of it boxed up, tucked in the back of the fridge, behind the gallon of milk where I thought it would be safe. I even wrote my name on it in bold, black Sharpie, Maya's. Do not eat. I walked into the kitchen that afternoon, my stomach growling, only to find Jaxson leaning against the counter. He was scrolling through his phone, a smug, greasy grin on his face. In front of him was my container. It was empty, save for a few smears of lemon caper sauce and a single, discarded parsley sprig. Did you eat that? I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't even look up. It was taking up space. Besides, I need the protein, pipsqueak. Big game on Friday. I told you not to. Mom and Dad told you not to. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and mocking. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer to buy me more. He just reached out, flicked my forehead hard enough to make my eyes water, and whispered, "What are you going to do about it?" Cried to Mom. "Go ahead. See who she believes." He was right. When I brought it up at dinner, my mom just sighed. "Maya, don't be so dramatic. It's just food. Jaxson is a growing athlete. He needs the calories." That was the moment. The click in my brain where the sadness died and something much darker took its place. If they weren't going to give me justice, I was going to build it myself. I spent the next 3 hours in my room, staring at the ceiling, plotting. I didn't want to just ruin his day. I wanted to ruin his image. I wanted to take that 250-pound wall of ego and crack it right down the middle in front of everyone he cared about. The next afternoon, I convinced my best friend's older brother to drive us to the Wild World pet store on the edge of town. I told him I was starting a science project on insect behavior. I walked out of that store with 3 cardboard boxes, each one vibrating with the frantic energy of a dozen large feeder crickets. 36 of them in total. Long, twitching antennae, powerful back legs, and that dry, clicking sound that makes your skin crawl. I hid them in my closet, the chirping muffled by a pile of laundry. Every time I heard a creak in the hallway, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline was intoxicating. For the first time in 13 years, I wasn't the victim. I was the architect. The plan relied on Jackson's one consistent habit, his gym bag. He treated that bag like a holy relic. It was a massive, black duffel that smelled of sweat, old leather, and ego. Every night, he'd pack it for the next day's practice. Gatorade, his cleats, his pads, and a change of clothes, and leave it by the mudroom door so he could grab it on his way out at 6 a.m. I waited. I stayed awake until the house fell into that heavy, suburban silence. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. I crept down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. The mudroom was cold. I could hear Jackson's rhythmic snoring echoing from upstairs, the sound of a man who thought he was untouchable. I knelt beside the bag. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unzip the main compartment. The smell hit me immediately, the rank, sour stench of a locker room. I took the first box of crickets. My skin prickled. I hated bugs. The way they moved was chaotic and wrong. But my hatred for Jaxson was stronger than my fear of insects. I slid the cardboard tab open. A few crickets immediately scrambled out, disappearing into the dark recesses of the bag, hiding in the folds of his jersey and the toes of his cleats. I emptied the second box, then the third. I watched them vanish into the depths of the duffel, 36 silent saboteurs waiting for their moment. I zipped the bag shut, carefully leaving a tiny, half-inch gap at the end so they wouldn't suffocate. They needed to be alive. They needed to be fast. The next day was a blur of nervous energy. In our town, the junior and senior highs shared one massive building. Grades 7 through 12, all under one roof. It was a pressure cooker of gossip and reputation. Because our house was so far out, and because the bus was a nightmare, I was forced to stay after school and sit in the bleachers during Jackson's varsity football practice until our parents picked us both up. The sun was brutal that day. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant whistle of the coaches. I sat on the top row of the bleachers, my notebook open on my lap, pretending to do homework. But I wasn't reading. I was watching. Down on the field, Jaxson was in his element. He was slamming into the tackling dummies, shouting, acting like the king of the world. He looked invincible. Then, the coach blew the whistle for a water break. I felt my throat go dry. This was it. Jaxson trotted over to the sidelines where his bag was sitting. He was sweating, panting, his helmet tucked under his arm. He looked like the picture of high school heroism. A group of cheerleaders was standing only 10 feet away, laughing and pointing. Half the school was lingering around the fence, watching the stars prepare for Friday night. Jaxson reached down. He grabbed the zipper of his bag. He didn't just crack it open. He ripped it wide, looking for his oversized water bottle. For a second, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, the first one hit him right in the neck. I saw Jackson's hand freeze. He brushed at his throat, a look of confusion crossing his face. Then, as if a dam had burst, the bag erupted. 36 large, panicked crickets, having been trapped in a dark, stinking hellscape for 10 hours, saw the light and leaped for freedom. They weren't just crawling. They were launching themselves. One landed on his cheek. 3 more scrambled up his bare arms. One disappeared inside his football jersey, down his back. Jackson's eyes went wide. His jaw dropped. And then, the golden child, the 250-pound monster who terrorized me for a decade, let out a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a manly yell. It was a high-pitched, glass-shattering, blood-curdling shriek. It sounded exactly like a final girl in a 1980s slasher flick. He started dancing, a frantic, pathetic jig, slapping at his own body, screaming at the top of his lungs as he tried to peel his jersey off. He tripped over his own feet, falling backward into the dirt, still screaming, his voice cracking and hitting notes I didn't think the human throat could produce. The entire field went silent. The coaches froze. The cheerleaders stopped mid-sentence. "Get them off. Get them off me," Jaxson wailed, rolling on the ground like he was on fire. A cricket landed right on his forehead, and he let out a fresh sob, his face contorting in pure, unadulterated terror. I sat on the bleachers, my heart racing, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I watched as the tough guy dissolved into a heap of tears and hysterics over a few harmless bugs. I knew right then, the golden child was dead, and I was the one who pulled the trigger. But as the crowd started to move toward him, and the first ripples of laughter began to break the silence, I realized something. This was only the beginning. He was going to look for someone to blame. And if I didn't play the next few minutes perfectly, my nuclear revenge was going to turn into a suicide mission. The sound of the laughter was louder than his scream. That was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't just a few snickers from the sidelines. It was a collective, thunderous roar that echoed off the brick walls of the gymnasium. It was the sound of an idol falling from its pedestal and shattering into a million jagged pieces. I stayed in the bleachers for exactly 5 seconds, long enough to burn the image into my retina. Jaxson, the apex predator of our high school, was currently curled in a fetal position in the dirt, sobbing while a stray cricket perched on his shoulder like a tiny, mocking gargoyle. Then, the mask went on. I scrambled down the metal stairs, my face contorted into a look of shattered innocence. I pushed through the crowd of students who were already holding up their phones, recording the most pathetic moment of Jackson's life. Jaxson! Oh my God, Jaxson! I shrieked, throwing myself toward him. I reached him just as Coach Miller was pulling him up by the shoulder pads. Jaxson was shaking. Not just a little tremor. His entire 250-pound frame was convulsing with a mix of terror and absolute, soul-crushing humiliation. His face was a blotchy, tear-streaked mess. The tough guy was gone. In his place was a little boy who was afraid of the dark. What happened? I cried, grabbing his arm. I felt his muscles jump under my touch. He looked at me, his eyes unfocused and glazed with panic. They were inside. He wheezed, his voice cracking. Everywhere. Thousands of them. It was just crickets, son, Coach Miller said, his voice dripping with a disappointment so thick you could cut it with a knife. He looked at the black gym bag, where a few stragglers were still hopping out onto the grass. He looked back at Jaxson, his star player, his captain, and I saw the respect vanish from his eyes in real time. Get yourself together. You're making a scene. But the scene was already made. By the time my parents' SUV pulled into the parking lot 10 minutes later, the video had already hit the school's spotted page. The caption? The Great Wall of Jaxson falls to a bug. The car ride home was a symphony of suffocating tension. Jaxson sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might snap. My father was white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his face a mask of silent fury. My mother was reaching back, patting Jackson's knee. It was just a prank, honey, she soothed, her voice trembling. Some jealous boy on the team probably did it. They're just intimidated by your talent. He screamed like a girl, Martha. My father barked, his eyes fixed on the road. The whole school saw it. My son, the starting tackle, crying over bait. He was startled, my mother snapped. Anyone would be. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at my reflection in the side mirror. I looked so small, so sweet, so harmless. Inside, I was vibrating with a dark, electric joy. I had tasted blood, and it was sweeter than any chicken piccata. When we got home, Jaxson didn't eat dinner. He went straight to his room and slammed the door so hard a picture frame in the hallway fell and shattered. My parents spent the evening in the kitchen, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about reputation management and calling the principal to demand an investigation into hazing. I stayed in the shadows of the hallway, listening. It had to be Miller's kid, my dad muttered. He's been gunning for Jackson's spot all season. We need to make sure those videos are taken down, my mom whispered. It's bullying, plain and simple. Bullying. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. When Jaxson spent years making my life a living hell, it was tough love. When he ate my food, broke my things, and bruised my spirit, it was just being a boy. But now that he was the one being laughed at, now it was a national emergency. That night, the house felt different. The heavy footsteps I used to fear were gone. Instead, there was a heavy, brooding silence coming from the room next door. I was tucked into bed, drifting off to the most peaceful sleep I'd had in years, when my door creaked open. I froze. My heart, which had been so calm, began to kick against my ribs. Jaxson stood in the doorway. He didn't turn on the light. The moonlight from the hallway cast a long, distorted shadow across my floor. He looked massive, a dark silhouette of suppressed rage. Maya, he whispered. His voice was low, devoid of the usual mockery. It was cold. Yeah. I kept my voice small, trembling. You were in the mudroom last night, he said. It wasn't a question. I want to get a glass of water, Jax. What? He stepped into the room. The floorboards didn't groan this time. They seemed to whimper. He walked over to my bed and leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the sour scent of his sweat and the lingering odor of the locker room. I found one, he hissed. A cricket. It was under the rug in the mudroom, right where my bag was. I stared at him, my eyes wide, performing the role of the confused little sister. A cricket? Jax, you're scaring me. You're acting crazy. Maybe one followed you home in your hair or something. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip wasn't playful this time. It was a vice. If I find out you had anything to do with this, if I find out you made me look like a coward in front of the whole town. You did that yourself, Jaxson, I whispered. The words were out before I could stop them. This sweet sister, mask slipped for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. The confusion in his face turned into a slow, burning realization. He didn't hit me. He didn't yell. He just leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You think you're smart," he muttered. "But you're still just a little girl living in my house. You think the school is laughing now? Wait until they see what I do to you tomorrow. You're going to wish you never bought those boxes, Maya. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of freak you are." He let go of my wrist and backed out of the room, closing the door softly. A soft click of the latch, a sound far more terrifying than a slam. I lay there in the dark, my wrist throbbing where he'd squeezed it. He knew, or at least he suspected. And a cornered animal is always the most dangerous. The next morning at school, the atmosphere was electric. The cricket video had gone viral within our school's ecosystem. People were chirping in the hallways as Jaxson walked by. Literally chirping. I saw a group of seniors toss a handful of grass at his feet as he walked toward his locker. Jaxson ignored them, his head down, his shoulders hunched. But I saw his eyes. He was looking for me. During lunch, I was sitting at my usual table when the intercom crackled to life. "Maya Vance, please report to the principal's office." Maya Vance. The cafeteria went quiet. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. I looked over at the athlete's table. Jaxson was sitting there, surrounded by his remaining cronies. He wasn't eating. He was staring directly at me, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across his face. He had done something. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. As I walked past his table, he leaned back in his chair and mouthed 3 words to me. "Check your locker." I didn't go to the office. I ran to my locker in the 7th grade wing. A small crowd had already gathered there. They were pointing and whispering, their faces a mix of horror and amusement. I pushed through them, and my breath hitched in my throat. My locker had been pried open, but it wasn't what was inside that made my blood run cold. It was what he had done with it. Jaxson hadn't just used crickets. He had gone to the same pet store. He had spent his own money, but he didn't buy bait. Inside my locker, pinned to my jacket, taped to my textbooks, and crawling over my extra pair of shoes, were dozens of Madagascar, hissing cockroaches. They were huge, the size of my palm, their dark, armored bodies glistening under the fluorescent lights. And on the inside of the locker door, written in thick, red permanent marker, were the words, "The Bug Queen's Brood. She likes to watch them crawl." I realized his plan instantly. He wasn't going to deny the crickets anymore. He was going to frame me as a disturbed, bug-obsessed freak who had been harassing him for months. He was going to turn my revenge into a sign of my own mental instability. He was going to use my own weapon to destroy my life. I stood there, staring at the hissing insects, feeling the eyes of the entire school on my back. I could hear the whispers starting. "She's the one. She put them in his bag. She's a psycho." Jaxson was standing at the end of the hallway, watching me, his arms crossed over his chest. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd turned the tables. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't just a sweet little girl. I was the girl who had spent 13 years learning exactly how to survive him. And if he wanted to play nuclear, I was more than happy to show him what a real explosion looked like. I reached into my locker, ignored the hissing, and grabbed my phone. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call the principal. I called the one person in this town who hated Jaxson more than I did. The man who had been waiting for a reason to kick him off the team and revoke his scholarship. It was time to stop being petty. It was time to go for the throat. I didn't scream. That was his first mistake. Jaxson expected a breakdown, a hysterical girl sobbing over giant insects while he stood by and played the hero who uncovered the truth. But as the Madagascar hissing cockroaches pulsed against my biology textbook, I felt a strange, icy calm wash over me. I looked at the crowd, then at Jaxson, and I did something he never expected. I laughed. It wasn't a crazy laugh. It was a soft, pitying chuckle that made the students around me go silent. "You really went back to the pet store, Jax?" I said, my voice carrying perfectly down the hallway. "You were so embarrassed by a few crickets that you spent your whole allowance trying to frame your 13-year-old sister? That's actually really sad." The whispers shifted instantly. The Bug Queen narrative was already dying. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked straight toward the administration wing. I didn't go to the principal, though. Principal Higgins was a football fan who had a signed photo of Jaxson on his desk. No, I went to Mr. Sterling, the athletic director. Sterling was an ex-Marine who believed that sports were about character, not just stats. He was the one man in the school who saw Jackson's golden boy act as the thin veneer it really was. I sat in Mr. Sterling's office, the heavy scent of floor wax and old trophies filling the room. I didn't lead with the bugs. That was petty. I led with the truth I'd been documenting for 6 months. I pulled out my phone and opened a hidden folder. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady but flavored with just enough scared little sister to keep the leverage. "I've been terrified to show anyone this because I didn't want to ruin my brother's future. But after what he did to my locker today, I don't feel safe in my own house anymore." I handed him the phone. On the screen was a video I'd taken through a crack in Jackson's bedroom door 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a prank. It was Jaxson, sitting at his desk, carefully transferring a clear liquid from a vial into a syringe. He was using performance-enhancing supplements, the kind that were strictly banned by the State Athletic Association. But that wasn't all. I had photos of the supplement stash he kept hidden inside an old, hollowed-out Xbox 360 in his closet. And I had the receipts, literally. I'd found the discarded packaging in the outside trash and photographed it. Mr. Sterling's face turned a shade of gray that I can only describe as a storm cloud. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his desk phone and dialed the principal. "Higgins, get Jaxson Vance and his parents in here. Now. And call the school resource officer." The next hour was the most satisfying 60 minutes of my life. My parents arrived, looking frazzled and indignant, ready to defend their son against Maya's lies. They walked into the office with that familiar, arrogant swagger. Jaxson sat in the corner, glaring at me with a look that promised violence the moment we were alone. "This has gone far enough," my father boomed, slamming his hand on Mr. Sterling's desk. "Maya planted those crickets to humiliate Jaxson, and now she's making up stories because he stood up to her. She needs to be suspended." Mr. Sterling didn't blink. He simply turned his computer monitor around. He didn't show them the video of the crickets. He showed them the video of Jackson's needle. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. Jackson's swagger evaporated. He didn't just look small. He looked like he was shrinking into his chair. "This is a violation of the state athletic code, a violation of school policy, and potentially a legal matter depending on the substance," Mr. Sterling said, his voice like grinding stones. "Jaxson, you are hereby stripped of your captaincy. You are suspended from the team indefinitely, pending a full investigation. And given the evidence of the locker tampering today, I'm recommending an immediate 10-day out-of-school suspension." "But the scholarship," my mother whispered, her voice cracking. "The scholarship is gone," Sterling said flatly. "I'll be notifying the scouts this afternoon. We don't represent this school with cheats and bullies." Jaxson lunged then. Not at Sterling, but at me. "You little rat. I'll kill you." He didn't even get close. The school resource officer, who had been standing by the door, grabbed Jackson's arm and forced him back into the chair. My parents looked at their son, their golden child. And for the first time in 15 years, I saw something in their eyes that wasn't pride. It was shame. Total, crushing shame. The fallout was nuclear. Jaxson was expelled 3 days later after the investigation found he'd been stealing equipment from the gym to sell online to fund his supplements. The Scream Queen video was just the beginning of his social death. He went from the most popular kid in school to a pariah overnight. The football team, once his loyal subjects, turned on him the moment they realized his cheating might get their entire season forfeited. My parents tried to blame me at first. They tried to say I destroyed the family. But I had a backup plan for that, too. I told them very calmly that if they ever raised their voices to me again, or if Jaxson ever touched me, the video of him using would find its way to the local news and the police. I had copies on 3 different cloud drives. I essentially blackmailed my way into a peaceful life. For the rest of high school, I lived in a house of silence. Jaxson was sent to a military-style boarding school 3 states away, paid for by the college fund our parents had originally set aside for his bright future. My parents finally looked at me, but they didn't see a sweet little girl anymore. They saw a predator. They were afraid of me. And honestly, I liked it that way. The best part, though, wasn't the silence or the power. It happened about a year later. I was walking through the school hallway when I saw a group of freshmen gathered around a locker. They were laughing, pointing at a small, brown shape hopping across the floor. "Is that a cricket?" one of them asked, grinning. People always tell you to be the bigger person. They tell you that living well is the best revenge. But they're wrong. Living well is fine, but watching your tormentor's entire world burn to ash because you were the one who lit the match? That is true satisfaction. I'm my advance. And I'm not the sweet little sister anymore. I'm the girl who won.